My name is Alex Mills, and to begin at the beginning, I was born in 1914 in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, Canada. Like a lot of individuals, my interest in chemistry was sparked by a teacher in high school, kind of a wild Welshman whose name is Mr. Evans. And he let me fill the nitric acid bottles or some exciting thing like that. But anyway, that sparked my interest, so that by the time that I went to the University of Saskatchewan, I decided that chemistry was for me. I liked the experimental part of it, and throughout my career, I've been fortunate enough to be involved with some extremely interesting people, very interesting people. Not excluding, by the way, the president of the University of Saskatchewan, Mr. Murray, President Murray, and I recall very clearly when I had to go to him and tell him I couldn't pay my tuition. Could he carry me on his books for a year? He graciously said so, and I want to emphasize I did repay it, so that worked out. And so I graduated then with a bachelor's degree, Bachelor of Science, in 1934. We had in the chemistry department, as head of it, a man named Thorvaldsen, Professor Thorvaldsen, and it's a little interesting that in Saskatoon, I think there were two chemists employed, and they were really what they were doing was analyzing the nitrogen content by Kjeldahl of wheat. And so why we had all the chemists who graduated and went out throughout the world, I don't know, but apparently it was due to these individuals, incidentally by a young professor named Spinks, who ultimately became president of the University of Saskatchewan. I might mention also he had a young student who was a classmate of mine, whose name is Henry Taube, who was recently awarded a Nobel Prize. So that was a landmark that ultimately came to be. And at this time, as a matter of fact, I seem to be involved with several Nobel Prize winners, because one summer, another chap and I, Stanley Herbert, worked for a new professor named Gerhard Hertzberg, who also ultimately got the Nobel Prize. And along the range of interesting things, you know, what we were doing was looking at active nitrogen and the spectroscopy of that, which occurs in the northern lights. So that one of the things that's always interesting is the diversity of things which turn up to be of interest as you think back on them. After getting a master's degree working on active hydrogen at the University of Saskatchewan, I went to Columbia University, New York City. Of course, New York City was quite a little change for me from the prairies of Saskatchewan, and I ultimately there worked with Harold Urey, doing isotopic tracers and really some quite interesting work on separation of isotopes. And as I think back of it, I actually made my first catalyst there, one which converted carbon dioxide and deuterium to CD4. CD4, heavy methane, had the advantage that nothing else was of the same molecular weight, so that in fact you could look at the mass spectrometry and tell whether you'd done separation and got some C13, more C13 in the species of separation. This was a part of a separation product. And by the way, as everybody else notices, their career is somewhat affected. It was Depression times in Saskatchewan, and of course in 1939-40, when I graduated from Columbia University, there was wartime, so there was a lot of pressure then on these social situations. I did teach a year at Dartmouth and got married in 1940 to Roberta Walker, which ultimately turned out to have 4 children and now 9.5 grandchildren. So that also was a successful experiment. In 1940, I joined the Houdry Process Corporation, slightly different name then, CDC, Catalytic Development Corporation. And again, I was fortunate to find some very challenging and interesting people, not the least of whom, of course, was Eugene Houdry. And I was part of a small team for a while on synthetic rubber. And my goodness, we worked night and day. We worked Saturdays, we worked Sundays, we worked 11 till 11 o'clock at night on that. One of the successful things, by the way, turned out to be the butadiene process, which was Mr. Houdry's baby for a long time. And of course, the Japanese had taken the Malay Peninsula, so this was a critical feature to have ways of making synthetic rubber, and the butadiene therefore. Alex Oblad mentioned that it's unusual that Houdry, who was an engineer and not a chemist, was so successful in catalysis. And it's really a puzzle to recognize what it is that he was so successful in. But no doubt it was his inventiveness, his curiosity, and but in some perhaps unusual ways. For example, one of the things that he was insistent on was that that we regenerate nickel catalysts, and the reason was Houdry said when he had the dull tool, a nickel tool, a metal tool, they took it to the shop and sharpened it, and we ought to be able to do the same thing with a catalyst. We said, well, there's no relation. Oh, yes, there is. And he kept his work on, and by Jove, we then found a solution. So he had the right basic concept, even though it was not a chemical concept. But he was an extremely persuasive person, enthusiastic person, and simply just believed that the catalyst could do everything. And his life was spent proving that. And towards the end of his life, he got interested in biological catalysts. He got interested in environmental control. As you know, was a key person really in automobile converters to cut down activity in that site. One also personal anecdote I told about him was that one time he had a little cold and his secretary came in to give him a pill, and he took two, and she said, "Oh, you're only supposed to take one." And he says, "I always take double." And that